Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone here in Utrecht and also on the screen, hoping that we can do this in hybrid mode. So my name is Koen Leurs. I'm assistant professor here in the Media and Culture Department and also teaching in the graduate gender program. And I'll be your host and chair today. And here I'm also supported by Kenan Alayak here in the back of the room, founder and director of the Refugee Wellbeing and Integration Initiative, and also research assistant in the Media and Culture Department. So with today's joint book launch and discussion, we seek to further develop discussions on migration and borders in a digital and datafied world. My next slide will allow me. So it's an absolute honor today that we can bring together a group of prominent voices in this debate. Professor Mia Georgiou, Professor Huub Dijsselbloem, Professor Saskia Witteborn, and Professor Albert Ali Salah, and also Tuba Birkan, who will join us later after teaching. So this is a very timely discussion, given recent experiments, for example, with securitization through lie detection at EU borders, the use of 24/7 GPS tracking of migrants facing deportation in the UK, facial recognition and body scanners at airports, or the use of sound cannons in Greece to deter migrants from approaching its borders. Recent events also remind us of how colonial and racialized legacies shape contemporary perceptions and logics of migration. Take the devastating Russian invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent EU response in welcoming Ukrainians fleeing war. This warm welcome starkly contrasts with the pushback of non-white irregularized migrants at the Mediterranean, or the purposefully delayed processing of asylum claims of non-white migrants in various nations across the EU. So from the level of lived experience, we have observed how digital technologies have become part of everyday practice. The growth of remittance flows, transnational networks, digital diasporas, and local activist and solidarity initiatives, as among others Saskia Witteborn will address in her talk today. So as a result of digitization and datafication, we can now see that digital migration is fundamentally constituting one another. The migrant is being co-constituted through digital and datafied forms, but also vice versa. Experiments in the context of migration are being carried out to deploy and develop new technologies. So in the last decades, from various fields, scholars have begun to research this interplay, resulting in the emergence of what can be called an interdisciplinary research area of digital migration studies. And from this area, questions are emerging with regards to ontology, epistemology, and methodology and ethics of doing research on migration and digital technologies. And here we can take ontology to reflect really on the essence of what digital migration studies scholars can set to examine. It invites philosophical reflection about the object of our scholarly inquiry, and also to give a systematic account of its existence, so this interplay between the digital and migration. To date, migration and technologies have mostly been studied as two isolated and separated phenomena that may incidentally converge in specific temporal and geographical context. We therefore should also perhaps take as a starting point that the essence of migration is fundamentally co-shaped by media technologies, and migration does not exist outside of technological development. So digital migration as a relational ontology assumes that the digital and migration are inseparable. Instead, we can take these interrelations, or what Huub Dijsselbloem in his Border as Infrastructure signals as the technopolitics of migration and digital technologies. What can we learn when we take this relationship as the starting and primary object of analysis? So we shouldn't be assuming that the digital or migration have changed from an a priori existence, which was somehow less mediated or less interrelated. Here we shift attention and consider how these interrelationships develop over time in particularly situated constellations. So digital migration is, for example, remade resulting from the interacting of two sets of hegemonic rationalities, political rationalities. for example, the rationality of migration, as well as technocratic rationality. As media scholars Lili Guliaraki and Mirja Georgiou in their book The Digital Border argue, the dominant rationality of migration is one based on histories of colonialism, imperialism, racism, and nationalism, among others, which have rationalized and legitimized which bodies are allowed to be mobile and which are rendered immobile. Secondly, migration takes place within a technocratic rationality. So that this technocratic rationality assumes technologies can be applied with a clear cause and effect relationship. Time and time again, across geographies in so-called crisis situations of migration governance, techno-solutionism is celebrated as a means, as a quick fix to fix problems of migration. On the level then of epistemology, we can scrutinize these conditions, the political, socioeconomic, historical, cultural, technological, but also ideological, to which the co-shaping of migration and technologies takes place. And these questions are then inherently related to methodologies and to ethics of research, as migrants then increasingly come into being as a particularly narrow and also very much bounded and hierarchical categories. These categories result from spatial moves, from legal moves, as well as parallel data trails that are constituted through forms of governmental datafication of mobility, but also through everyday use of connectivity, technologies of connectivity. So scholars from various fields, including informatics, data science, cultural geography, cultural anthropology, geography, media and communication, critical race, post-colonial studies, gender studies, are adopting big as well as small data methods to study migration processes and practices. And in their edited volume, Data Science of Migration and Mobility, presented today by Albert Salah and Tuba Birkan, explore how digital data sources can be used for purposes of prediction as well as explanation. But a key commitment echoed throughout the 4 books presented here today is raising awareness of how digital technology and also data-driven forms of knowledge production may pose opportunities, but also risks for mobile subjects. So this admittedly quite packed afternoon is set up to foster interdisciplinary dialogue on these thorny questions and challenges. So we'll hear book presentations of about 25 to 30 minutes, starting with Professor Mirja Georgiou, who speaks from a perspective of media and communication, followed by Professor Huub Dijsselbloem, speaking from the perspective of science and technology studies, as well as philosophy of technology. Saskia Wittenborn from a media studies perspective, but also addressing questions of communications and spatiality in particular. And then Albert Ali Salah and Tuba Birkan from a data science and informatics perspective. So to foster dialogue and exchange, we'll have 2 respondents to each book presentation, scheduled for about 7 minutes each. And these 2 will also offer and ensure discussions will be based on additional diversity of perspectives. And after the responses, we'll have an open Q&A, take a couple of questions from the room and from online, and to see how we can engage in the open discussion. So I'll have a few housekeeping notes. We will also try to attend to questions coming to us through Teams, but also here from the floor. But try to keep your mics off on Teams, and when you're asking questions here in the room, turn your mic on. I should also make note that the talks will be recorded and will be shared afterwards. So not the Q&A and not people joining us online, except for Saskia Wittenborn's presentation today. Having said that, I would like to end with a word of thanks and support, which we have received in order to facilitate and make possible today, which is support from the Utrecht University so-called focus area governing the digital society. And within this focus area, we have established a group of where we meet with scholars from various disciplines to speak about questions relating to migration and the digital. Our recently started co-designing a fair digital asylum procedure research project which seeks to investigate the use of digital technologies by the Dutch government, border police, as well as immigration officials, together with relevant stakeholders, and to see how people involved in this procedure think about and perceive digital opportunities, but also risks as part of this procedure. Furthermore, also institutionally supported by the Graduate Gender Program and the Postcolonial Studies Initiative.